My name is Emma Winters, and 6 weeks ago, I was just a 28-year-old librarian living in a cramped studio apartment, making barely enough to cover rent and student loans. Then my beloved grandparents died in a tragic accident, leaving behind a secret fortune, and turning my family into strangers overnight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the modest suburb of Willow Creek, I never realized my grandparents, Margaret and Thomas Winters, were anything but ordinary middle-class retirees. Their 3-bedroom ranch house needed a fresh coat of paint, and Grandpa's ancient Buick had seen better days. They clipped coupons religiously, shopped at discount stores, and considered eating out a rare luxury reserved for special occasions. What I didn't know until recently was that beneath their frugal exterior lay a fortune built through decades of shrewd investments and extraordinary financial discipline. My grandfather had started as a bank teller in the 1970s, working his way up to become a respected regional manager while quietly acquiring commercial real estate properties throughout the Midwest. By the time he retired, he and my grandmother had amassed over $18 million in assets that nobody, not even their own children, knew about. My relationship with my parents couldn't have been more different from the one I shared with my grandparents. My father, William, inherited his father's intelligence but none of his humility or work ethic. He'd bounced between management positions his entire career, always convinced he deserved more recognition and compensation than he received. My mother, Rebecca, came from old money that had mostly disappeared before she was born, leaving her with expensive tastes but limited means to satisfy them. Family gatherings were exercises in tension. My parents viewed my grandparents' modest lifestyle as embarrassing rather than admirable. "Your father could afford to live in the best neighborhood in the city," my mother would whisper when we visited. "Instead, he chooses to live like he's one paycheck from poverty. It's honestly pathetic." What my parents never understood was that my grandparents' frugality wasn't born from fear or miserliness, it came from profound wisdom about what truly mattered in life. "Money is just a tool, Emma," my grandfather would tell me during our weekend chess matches. "Not a measurement of your worth. The moment you start believing your bank account defines you is the moment you've lost something precious." My grandmother reinforced these lessons in her own way. When I was 12, she caught me showing off a new designer backpack my mother had splurged on to impress the other PTA moms. That evening, she took me to volunteer at a local homeless shelter. "Those people aren't less valuable than you because they have less," she explained as we served meals. "And you aren't more valuable than them because of what you own." These teachings shaped me profoundly. After college, I chose to become a librarian rather than pursue more lucrative careers my parents pushed me toward. "Books were my first love," I explained at family dinner when I announced my career choice. The disappointment on my parents' faces was unmistakable. "Libraries are dying institutions," my father scoffed. "You're wasting your potential on a job that will be obsolete in 10 years. My grandparents, however, celebrated my decision. "Following your heart is never a waste," my grandmother said, squeezing my hand under the table. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I established a comfortable routine in my adult life. I lived in a tiny but cozy studio apartment above a bookstore downtown. My salary at the Oak Ridge Public Library was modest, but I managed my finances carefully and found joy in simple pleasures, hiking in nearby state parks, hosting small dinner parties with friends, and volunteering at literacy programs for underprivileged children. Every Sunday without fail, I visited my grandparents for dinner. We'd tend to their vegetable garden together, play board games, or simply sit on their porch swing watching the neighborhood children play. These moments of connection were worth more to me than any material possession. My parents viewed these regular visits with suspicion. "You spend more time with them than with us," my mother complained during one of our infrequent phone calls. "People are starting to notice, Emma. It looks like you're just waiting for them to die so you can inherit whatever little they have." The irony of her accusation would only become apparent later. 6 weeks ago, on a rainy Tuesday evening, I was cataloging a new collection of historical fiction when my phone rang. The local police department was calling to inform me that my grandparents' car had been struck head-on by a drunk driver who crossed the center line. They had died instantly at the scene. The next few days passed in a haze of grief. My body moved through the motions of planning a funeral while my mind struggled to accept that I would never again hear my grandfather's rumbling laugh or feel my grandmother's gentle hands braiding my hair as she had done since I was a little girl. The funeral itself was a study in contrasts. My parents took charge, upgrading every modest arrangement I had selected to the most expensive options available. We need to honor them properly, my mother insisted, though she had criticized their cheap lifestyle for decades. My brother, Daniel, flew in from Los Angeles, spending most of the service texting business associates and checking stock prices on his phone. My Aunt Claire, my father's younger sister, whom I barely knew, sobbed dramatically for photographers from the local newspaper but was overheard in the bathroom complaining about having to miss her spa weekend. Her husband, Uncle Robert, stood awkwardly in the background, nervously checking his watch throughout the service. Meanwhile, dozens of community members, librarians my grandfather had mentored, families my grandmother had helped through tough times, neighbors whose children had received anonymous college scholarships, came to pay genuine respects. Many approached me with stories I'd never heard, revealing the quiet generosity my grandparents had practiced throughout their lives. Your grandmother paid for my daughter's insulin when we lost our insurance, confided Mrs. Ramirez, who owned the local bakery. She made me promise never to tell anyone while they were alive. 2 weeks after laying my grandparents to rest, I received a call from a Mr. James Harrison, who introduced himself as the manager of First Community Bank and my grandparents' personal financial advisor for over 30 years. I need you and your family to come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m., he said, his voice formal but kind. It's regarding your grandparents' estate. I expected a small inheritance, perhaps enough to pay off my student loans or make a down payment on a modest home. My grandparents had always provided for my education and occasionally helped with emergency expenses, but I had no idea of the true extent of their wealth. When I arrived at the bank the next morning, dressed in a simple black dress I'd worn to countless library events, I was surprised to find Mr. Harrison waiting for me in the lobby rather than a standard meeting room. He was in his early 60s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Your grandparents spoke of you often, Emma, he said, shaking my hand warmly. Thomas was so proud of your work promoting literacy in underserved communities. Before I could respond, the bank's glass doors swung open, and my family arrived en masse. My father entered first, already removing his designer sunglasses and scanning the room as if assessing property values. My mother followed closely behind, her expression shifting from boredom to keen interest when she noticed the ornate office we were being led toward. Daniel slouched and wearing what passed for business attire in his tech startup world, an expensive but wrinkled button-down and jeans that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Aunt Claire breezed in trailing designer perfume, already loudly complaining about parking. Uncle Robert nodded politely in my direction but quickly averted his eyes when my father glared at him. Let's make this quick, my father announced without bothering with greetings. Some of us have actual businesses to run today. Mr. Harrison's professional smile never wavered. Of course, William. Please follow me to the conference room. The bank's main conference room exuded old-world prosperity, with mahogany paneling and portraits of past presidents lining the walls. We arranged ourselves around a large oval table, my parents and brother clustering at one end, my aunt and uncle across from them, and me choosing a seat near Mr. Harrison's position at the head. Before we begin, Mr. Harrison said, placing a leather portfolio on the table, I want to clarify that Thomas and Margaret were of completely sound mind when they updated their will last year. They were thorough in their considerations and explicit in their wishes. My father made an impatient gesture. Just read it, James. We all know how this goes. Dad worked his way up from nothing, built his nest egg, standard inheritance distribution. Mr. Harrison ignored the interruption and opened the portfolio. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the formal legal language of my grandparents' last will and testament. After several minutes of technical terms regarding revocations of previous wills and appointment of executors, he reached the section everyone was waiting for. We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to all cash assets totaling approximately $7 million, our investment portfolio valued at approximately $8 million, all real estate holdings including our primary residence valued at $2 million, and our full ownership stake in Winter Properties LLC valued at approximately $1 million, to our beloved granddaughter, Emma Grace Winters. The room went completely silent. I stopped breathing for a moment, certain I had misheard. Mr. Harrison continued, we specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son William Winters, our daughter-in-law Rebecca Winters, our grandson Daniel Winters, our daughter Claire Morris, or our son-in-law Robert Morris, as we have provided for them during our lifetime and have made our reasons clear to our advisor. This is ridiculous. My father shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair tipped backward. He snatched the document from Mr. Harrison's hands, scanning it frantically. $18 million to a librarian? She wouldn't know the first thing about managing that kind of money. My mother's face had drained of color. There must be some mistake, James. Thomas always said William would take over his property management business. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. What about me? I'm family too. I need capital for my tech ventures. My latest app is going to revolutionize the fitness industry. Aunt Claire turned to me, her face flushed with anger. What did you do, Emma? How did you manipulate them into this? I sat in shocked silence, unable to process what was happening. $18 million. My modest grandparents had accumulated that much wealth, and they had left it all to me. The gravity of both the inheritance and my family's reaction left me speechless. Mr. Harrison calmly retrieved the will from my father's grip. If you'll all please take your seats, there's more. Thomas and Margaret recorded a video message to be played at this time. He pressed a button on a remote, and the large screen on the wall illuminated. My grandparents appeared sitting side by side on their familiar living room sofa. My heart clenched at seeing them alive again, looking exactly as they had the last time I'd visited. Grandpa Thomas spoke first. If you're watching this, it means we've passed on. We want to explain our decisions directly to prevent any misunderstandings. Grandma Margaret continued, William, Claire, we love you as our children, but we have been deeply disappointed by the values you have embraced and passed to your own children, with the exception of Emma. For the next several minutes, my grandparents explained that they had watched my father and aunt prioritize material wealth over relationships, treating them as a resource to be tapped rather than as parents to be cherished. They detailed years of missed family events, requested loans never repaid, and dismissive attitudes toward their modest lifestyle choices. The wealth we've accumulated, my grandfather explained, was never about status or luxury. It was about creating security and opportunities. Emma is the only one who has demonstrated these values consistently. She visits us not because she wants something, my grandmother added, but because she genuinely cares. She has chosen a career helping others despite the low pay because it fulfills her purpose. We trust Emma to be a good steward of what we've built, my grandfather continued. She will honor our legacy and use these resources wisely, not squander them on status symbols or get-rich-quick schemes. The video continued with my grandparents expressing their hopes for how the inheritance might be used to support education and literacy programs, areas they had always cared about but had limited time to address while managing their investments. As the screen went dark, my father exploded. This is absolute garbage. They were clearly senile. We will contest this will immediately. No judge will uphold this insanity. Mr. Harrison remained perfectly calm. They anticipated that response, William. They underwent extensive cognitive testing before finalizing this will, with multiple independent doctors certifying their competence. Additionally, they documented years of behaviors that informed their decision. I must advise you that contesting will be extremely difficult, expensive, and unlikely to succeed. My mother turned to me, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. Emma, darling, you understand this isn't right. Your grandparents were confused. This money belongs to the family, not just you. You'll share it with us, won't you? I felt cornered, all eyes on me. I have to think about this, I stammered. I had no idea they would do this. Think about it? Daniel scoffed. There's nothing to think about. That money should be divided equally or managed by someone with actual business experience, my father interjected, meaning himself. As the arguing intensified, Mr. Harrison gently touched my arm. You don't have to decide anything today, Emma. Take time to process. My office will handle all immediate matters related to the estate. He handed me a thick envelope. This contains all the relevant documents, keys to their house, and contact information for their financial advisors. Call me anytime with questions. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with threats of lawsuits and accusations flying. Mr. Harrison eventually asked everyone to leave, stating he had another appointment. As we filed out, my father grabbed my arm roughly. This discussion isn't over, he hissed. Come to our house tonight at 7. We will sort this out as a family. His tone made it clear this was not a request. I nodded numbly, too overwhelmed to argue. As they departed in their separate luxury vehicles, I sat in my 15-year-old compact car in the parking lot, clutching the envelope and wondering how an inheritance meant to be a blessing had so quickly become a curse. What I didn't realize then was that my grandparents had left me more than just money. They had left me a legacy of wisdom and a network of allies that would help me stand my ground against the storm that was coming. And at the center of that support network was Mr. Harrison, the unassuming bank manager who was about to become my most important ally in the battle ahead. I spent the afternoon in a daze, driving aimlessly around town, eventually parking at Lakeside Park where my grandparents had taken me for picnics throughout my childhood. The envelope from Mr. Harrison sat unopened on my passenger seat. Part of me wanted to peek inside to understand exactly what my grandparents had entrusted to me. Another part was terrified of the responsibility it represented. The reality of inheriting $18 million hadn't fully registered. Just last week, I'd been carefully budgeting to afford a minor car repair. Now I apparently had more money than I could spend in a lifetime. The transformation was too sudden, too enormous to process. As the afternoon sun began its descent, I reluctantly drove to my parents' sprawling 6,000-square-foot house in Oakwood Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in our city. The modern glass and stone structure had always felt more like a showroom than a home, designed to impress rather than comfort. I noted that everyone else had already arrived. My brother's Tesla sat beside my father's Mercedes in the circular driveway. Aunt Claire's Range Rover and what appeared to be a rental car, likely for my cousin Stephen who lived in Denver, were parked near the three-car garage. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed the envelope and headed inside, using the key I rarely needed. They were waiting in the formal living room, a space seldom used except for my mother's social gatherings. My father stood by the gas fireplace, tumbler of scotch in hand. My mother perched on the edge of an uncomfortable-looking designer chair while Daniel sprawled across the sofa, scrolling through his phone. Aunt Claire paced nervously, glass of white wine clutched in her manicured hand. Uncle Robert stood by the window, gazing out as if wishing to be elsewhere. My cousin Stephen, whom I hadn't seen in at least 3 years, leaned against the wall, attempting to look disinterested despite the obvious tension in the room. Finally, my father said when I entered, "Sit down, Emma." I chose a chair near the door, suddenly aware I might need a quick exit. The envelope from Mr. Harrison felt heavy in my hands. "Let's be reasonable about this," my father began, his business negotiation voice in full effect. "Your grandparents clearly weren't thinking rationally. They meant for the family to benefit, not just you." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Sweetie, managing wealth is complicated. Your father has the experience to handle this properly. You can still get a nice portion, perhaps enough for a down payment on a real house instead of that apartment." The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl, but I remained silent, still trying to process everything that had happened. Emboldened by my lack of response, my father continued. "Here's what we propose. You sign over the estate to me as the financial head of the family. I will ensure everyone gets their fair share. You'll receive 10%, which is more than generous considering your limited needs." 10%? I finally found my voice. "That would still be nearly $2 million. "Exactly," Daniel jumped in. "More than enough for a librarian. I need at least $6 million for my tech startup. It's going to revolutionize how people track their fitness goals." I looked at him skeptically. Daniel had bounced between get-rich-quick schemes for years, never holding a job longer than 4 months. His last venture, an app for finding public restrooms, had collapsed after burning through $100,000 of my parents' money. "The house should go to us," Aunt Claire interjected. "We have 3 children to consider. That neighborhood would give them access to better schools than in Colorado." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Aunt Claire had never once visited my grandparents in that house. Her children, my cousins, were practically strangers who sent obligatory birthday cards written in my aunt's handwriting. "I don't understand why Grandma and Grandpa would do this," Stephen added, speaking directly to me for the first time. "You weren't even their only grandchild." "I was the only one who visited them regularly," I replied quietly. As the evening progressed, their tactics evolved. When demands didn't work, they switched to guilt. "After all we've done for you," my mother said, her eyes dramatically moist. "We gave you life, a good home, opportunities. This is how you repay family loyalty?" I nearly choked on my water. "Loyalty? When was the last time either of you called? Just to check on me? When did you ever attend one of my library events?" My father changed strategies again. "We're not asking, Emma. We're telling you what will happen. Either you sign the transfer documents voluntarily, or we will contest the will. We'll bring up every questionable interaction you had with your grandparents. How often did you visit them alone? What did you tell them about us when we weren't there? It will get ugly." The threat hung in the air. I felt sick, but something inside me hardened. A memory surfaced of my grandfather teaching me to stand my ground during a playground dispute when I was 8. "No one can take your dignity unless you give it away, Emma," he had said. "Know what's right and hold firm." Uncle Robert, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. "Maybe we should all calm down and give Emma some time to think. This is a lot to process." My father rounded on him. "Stay out of this, Robert. This is family business." "I am family," he responded quietly, but immediately retreated when my father glared at him. As the clock ticked past 9, Daniel started drafting transfer paperwork on his laptop. My mother called their personal attorney for advice on the wording. Aunt Claire scrolled through real estate listings for my grandparents' house, talking about which walls she would knock down first. They had already divided my inheritance without my consent, mapping out how they would spend every dollar. Not once did anyone mention my grandparents' wishes or legacy. Not once did they ask what I thought should be done with the money. At 10:30, my father printed out the crude transfer document and slid it across the coffee table to me along with a pen. "Sign it," he demanded. "Now." I picked up the paper and read it carefully. The language was broad, essentially signing away all my rights to anything my grandparents had left me. In exchange, I would receive a percentage, to be determined later, at my father's sole discretion. I put the paper down and took a deep breath. "No." The room went silent. "What did you just say?" my father asked, his voice dangerously low. I said no. I will not sign this or anything like it. My grandparents trusted me with their legacy. For a reason. I intend to honor that trust. My mother launched into a tirade about ingratitude. Daniel called me names I won't repeat. Aunt Claire began sobbing dramatically about her children's future. Through it all, I sat still, the word no becoming a shield around me. Finally, my father slammed his glass down so hard it cracked. "That's enough," he roared. "I always told Dad you weren't to be trusted. You manipulated them just like you're trying to manipulate us now with this innocent act." He stalked toward me, pointing his finger inches from my face. "You have a choice to make right now, Emma. Either you sign that paper and remain part of this family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself disowned. You cannot have both." The ultimatum hung in the air between us. I looked around at the faces of my family members, searching for any sign of love or understanding. I found none. In that moment, I realized a painful truth: they had never really seen me as family. I was just a means to an end, a potential source of money, nothing more. "I'm not signing," I said firmly, standing up. "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I have to respect what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." "Then get out of my house," my father snarled. "You're no longer welcome here." The finality of his words stung more than I expected. Despite our differences, some childish part of me had always hoped for reconciliation, for understanding. That hope died as I looked into my father's cold eyes. I gathered my purse and the envelope from Mr. Harrison. "I guess this is goodbye then." "You'll regret this," Daniel called after me. "When all your little library friends start asking for handouts, you'll see what money does to relationships." As I reached the door, my mother's voice stopped me. "When you come crawling back, and you will, don't expect a warm welcome." I turned to face them one last time. My grandparents taught me that family is about love and support, not transactions. I'm sorry you never learned that lesson. With those words, I walked out into the cool night air. The door slammed behind me with disturbing finality. Standing beside my car in the driveway, I suddenly felt the weight of everything crashing down. I was effectively alone. My family had disowned me. In the span of a few hours, I had gained millions but lost the only blood relations I had left, flawed as they were. I sat in my car and finally allowed the tears to come. They streamed down my face as I gripped the steering wheel, great heaving sobs that made my whole body shake. I cried for my grandparents, whose absence felt more acute than ever. I cried for the family I had always hoped for but never truly had. Mostly, I cried for myself, suddenly adrift in a world that had completely changed. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I wiped my eyes and started the car. I had nowhere to go. My tiny studio apartment suddenly seemed insufficient shelter against the storm of emotions and challenges I was facing. I needed guidance, support, someone who could help me navigate this new reality. Almost without conscious thought, I found myself driving toward First Community Bank. It was nearly 11 p.m., and the building was dark except for a single office on the second floor where a light still burned. As I parked, I realized I was hoping to find Mr. Harrison still working late. The thought seemed ridiculous. Bank managers don't typically work until midnight, but I was desperate for an ally. To my surprise, as I approached the building, the front door opened, and Mr. Harrison emerged, briefcase in hand. He stopped short when he saw me, concern immediately washing over his face. "Emma? Is everything all right?" One look at my tear-stained face answered his question. "Come inside," he said gently, holding the door open. "It looks like you could use a friend right now." I followed him back to his office, a warm space with walls lined with books rather than the financial certificates I might have expected. He gestured to a comfortable chair and disappeared briefly, returning with 2 cups of tea. "Your grandfather always said tea was the proper remedy for life's hardest moments," he explained, placing a steaming mug in front of me. "Now, tell me what happened." The kindness in his voice unleashed a fresh wave of tears. Between sobs, I related the evening's events, my family's demands, threats, and ultimate rejection. Mr. Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he sighed deeply. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but your grandparents predicted exactly this response. That's why they prepared so thoroughly. He reached into his desk drawer and removed a thick folder with my name written across it in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. Your grandparents asked me to give you this if your family reacted poorly to the will. Inside are letters they wrote to you, explaining their decisions in greater detail. There's also information about resources they put in place to help you manage this transition. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page was a handwritten letter from my grandmother. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then our family has reacted as we feared they might. First, let me say how sorry I am that you're bearing this burden alone. The choice to leave everything to you wasn't made lightly or hastily. Your grandfather and I spent years observing how money influenced everyone around us, our children, their spouses, even strangers. We watched as wealth became the center of their value system, while you remained true to the values we tried to instill. Money is a powerful tool, Emma, but a dangerous master. We've seen it corrupt good people and destroy families. We chose you as our heir not to punish the others, but because we trust you to use these resources wisely, to create good rather than simply acquire more. You may feel overwhelmed right now. That's natural. But remember, you are stronger than you know. And you are not alone. With all our love, Grandma, and Grandpa too. Tears blurred my vision as I read the letter a second time. Their words provided comfort, but also underscored the enormous responsibility they had placed on my shoulders. I don't know the first thing about managing this kind of money, I admitted, looking up at Mr. Harrison. I've never even had a savings account with more than $5,000 in it. He smiled kindly. That's why I'm here. Your grandparents appointed me as the trustee to help you transition into this role. You don't have to make any major decisions tonight, or even this week. Take time to grieve, to process. The money isn't going anywhere. As we talked further, Mr. Harrison explained that my grandparents had set up a structured trust that would provide me with ongoing support and guidance. They had also established a small team of advisors, financial experts, legal counsel, and even a therapist specializing in sudden wealth transitions, all people they had trusted implicitly. Your grandmother was particularly insistent about the therapist, Mr. Harrison chuckled. She said, money changes how the world sees you before you've had time to see yourself clearly. She wanted to make sure you had support for the emotional aspects of this inheritance, not just the financial ones. For the first time since the reading of the will, I felt a sense of calm settling over me. My grandparents hadn't just thrown me into the deep end, they had provided swimming lessons and lifeguards. Where will you go tonight? Mr. Harrison asked as our conversation wound down around midnight. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My studio apartment suddenly seemed an insufficient refuge. What if my family showed up there, demanding entry or making scenes? I'm not sure, I admitted. A hotel, maybe. Mr. Harrison shook his head. Your grandparents anticipated this too. He reached into the folder and extracted another set of keys. The key with the blue tag is to their lake house about 40 minutes north of here. Very few people know about it. They purchased it through a separate LLC specifically to have a retreat from family demands. It's fully furnished and stocked with essentials. The security code is your birthday. The mention of the lake house triggered a memory. Once, when I was about 12, my grandparents had taken me to a beautiful cabin by a secluded lake. We'd spent a magical weekend fishing, reading on the dock, and making s'mores by a fire pit. When I'd asked if we could bring my parents and Daniel next time, my grandmother had exchanged a meaningful look with my grandfather. This is our special place, she'd explained gently. Sometimes we need a sanctuary where we can just be ourselves, without performing for others. I hadn't understood what she meant then. I did now. Mr. Harrison walked me to my car, promising to call in the morning to check on me. As I prepared to drive away, he placed a hand on my shoulder. Your grandparents were extraordinary people, Emma. They built their wealth through intelligence and discipline, but what made them truly remarkable was their humanity. They never confused net worth with self-worth. That wisdom is the most valuable part of your inheritance. As I drove through the night toward the lake house, guided by the GPS coordinates Mr. Harrison had provided, I felt a curious mixture of grief and gratitude. I had lost my family, or perhaps more accurately, discovered they had never truly been the family I thought they were. But I had gained something precious too, a deeper understanding of my grandparents' values and the knowledge that they had believed in me completely. The lake house appeared exactly as I remembered it, a charming 2-bedroom cabin nestled among towering pines on the shoreline of Lake Clearwater. When I entered the security code and pushed open the door, I half expected to find my grandparents waiting inside, my grandmother brewing tea, my grandfather stoking the fireplace. Instead, I found a space frozen in time from their last visit. A novel lay open on the side table, my grandmother's reading glasses marking her place. My grandfather's favorite sweater hung over a chair back. A half-completed crossword puzzle sat on the kitchen counter, filled out in his distinctive block handwriting. The sight nearly undid me again. I sank onto the sofa, breathing in the lingering scents of pine, old books, and my grandmother's lavender sachets. For the first time, I fully grasped that they were truly gone. The inheritance, the family drama, all of it had created a whirlwind that had somehow kept the reality of their absence at bay. Now, in the quiet of their sanctuary, grief crashed over me in waves. I must have fallen asleep on the sofa because I awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. For a moment, I was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. I was $18 million richer and entirely alone in the world. As I made coffee in the small kitchen, I noticed a framed quotation hanging on the wall that I didn't remember from childhood visits. It contained words from Henry David Thoreau: "Wealth is the ability to fully experience life." Below it, in my grandmother's handwriting, was added, "Remember, Emma, money doesn't make life good. A good life makes money meaningful." Somehow, even from beyond the grave, my grandparents were still teaching me, still guiding me toward what truly mattered. With coffee in hand, I stepped onto the deck overlooking the lake and made a silent promise to them and to myself. I would use their gift not just to enhance my own life, but to create meaning and opportunity for others. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since receiving the news of my inheritance, I felt equal to the challenge. My grandparents had trusted me with their legacy. I would not let them down. I spent 3 days at the lake house, a healing cocoon away from the chaos. Each morning, I sat on the dock with coffee, watching the mist rise off the water as I read more letters from my grandparents. Each evening, I built a small fire in the stone hearth and sorted through the practical matters of my new reality. Mr. Harrison called daily, never pushing but gently guiding me toward decisions that needed to be made. On the 4th morning, I woke with a newfound clarity. I couldn't hide forever. It was time to face my new life and the responsibilities that came with it. "I'm ready to come back," I told Mr. Harrison when he called for his daily check-in. "There's work to be done." "I'll see you at the bank at noon," he replied, his voice warm with approval. As I drove back to the city, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages and missed calls from my family. I'd silenced their notifications but hadn't blocked them completely, a lingering hesitation I couldn't quite shake. The messages followed. A predictable pattern: threats from my father, manipulative guilt from my mother, insults from Daniel, and theatrical pleas from Aunt Claire. One message from Uncle Robert stood out for its difference in tone: "Emma, I hope you're safe. What they're planning isn't right. Call me if you need anything." The warning sent a chill through me. What exactly were they planning? I arrived at First Community Bank just before noon, dressed in clothes I'd purchased at the small boutique near the lake, simple but professional attire that somehow helped me feel more prepared for whatever lay ahead. Mr. Harrison met me in the lobby, his customary warmth tempered by a look of concern. "I'm glad you're here," he said, leading me not to his office but to a larger conference room where several people were already gathered. "There have been developments." The room contained 4 individuals who rose as we entered. Mr. Harrison made quick introductions: Patricia Winters, the bank's chief security officer, no relation, despite the shared surname; Martin Chen, a distinguished-looking attorney; Dr. Lydia Okafor, a financial psychologist; and Detective Sandra Ramirez from the local police department. "Your family has been busy," Detective Ramirez said without preamble once we were seated. "Yesterday, your father filed a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent to manage your inheritance." "He what?" I gasped. Martin Chen, the attorney, slid a document across the table. "The petition claims you've been suffering from delusions and paranoia, evidenced by your irrational fear of family members and obsessive attachment to your grandparents. It further claims you've been manipulated by Mr. Harrison, who allegedly stands to gain financially from controlling your inheritance." I looked to Mr. Harrison, whose expression remained professionally neutral despite the accusations. "That's absurd," I said. "I'm perfectly competent, and Mr. Harrison has been nothing but ethical." "We know that," Patricia assured me. "Your grandparents were highly respected clients of this institution for over 40 years. We take these accusations against both you and our staff very seriously. The petition is merely the legal front," Detective Ramirez continued. "We've received information that your brother Daniel has been contacting various questionable individuals about ways to access your grandparents' house and safety deposit boxes. He's been quite indiscreet about it, fortunately for us. The reality of what my family was capable of hit me with new force. They weren't just trying to pressure me, they were attempting to legally strip me of my autonomy and possibly commit criminal acts to get what they wanted. Dr. Okafor, who had been quietly observing until now, spoke up. Emma, this level of manipulation and control is abusive. Your reaction, seeking space and time to process, was not only reasonable but healthy. What your family is doing now is financial elder abuse by proxy. They couldn't control your grandparents, so they're trying to control their legacy through you. The validation from this professional stranger was unexpectedly emotional. My entire life, I'd been made to feel that my sensitivity was weakness, my caution was cowardice, my independence was betrayal. To have someone clearly name the dynamic for what it was, abuse, felt like windows opening in a stuffy room. What do we do? I asked, straightening my shoulders. Martin Chen outlined a comprehensive legal strategy to counter my father's petition, while Detective Ramirez explained the measures being taken to monitor potential criminal activity. Patricia detailed the security protocols being implemented to protect both physical assets and digital accounts. Your grandparents were remarkably forward-thinking, she noted. The trust structure they created already has multiple safeguards against exactly this type of situation. They knew your family well. As the meeting continued, we moved from defense to practical matters of my inheritance. Mr. Harrison presented a comprehensive overview of my grandparents' assets, investment accounts, real estate holdings, business interests, and charitable foundations. The scope was dizzying. Your grandmother insisted we create this for you, he said, passing me what looked like a leather-bound journal. She called it Wealth Management for Book Lovers. It explains complex financial concepts using literary metaphors. She worked on it for months before she passed. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to my eyes. Even now, my grandmother was trying to translate the world of finance into language that would resonate with me. The most pressing matter, Martin Chen said, is your living situation. Your family knows about your apartment, and your father has indeed begun eviction proceedings as the property owner. We should secure you a new residence immediately, one they don't know about. Dr. Okafor nodded in agreement. A safe space is essential for your mental well-being through this transition. The meeting stretched into the afternoon as we developed both immediate and long-term plans. By the time we finished, I had a clear roadmap for the coming weeks: secure housing, counter legal challenges, protect assets, begin financial education, and establish boundaries with family. There's one more thing, Mr. Harrison said as the meeting wound down. Your grandparents left specific instructions about something they called the summit. In the event of family conflict, they wanted certain people gathered together at the bank 1 week from today. He handed me a list of names, over a dozen people I'd never heard of, along with brief descriptions: Thomas's first business partner, Margaret's college roommate, family who purchased the hardware store, nurse who cared for Margaret after surgery. Who are these people? I asked, puzzled. I don't know most of them personally, Mr. Harrison admitted. Your grandparents were very private about certain aspects of their lives. They only said these individuals would be important if there was a family dispute over their estate. The mystery added another layer to my already complex situation. What were my grandparents planning from beyond the grave? And how would these strangers help me face the storm my family had created? That evening, with Patricia's security team keeping watch, I packed essential items from my apartment. The space felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that my father had controlled it all along. Another invisible string I hadn't known was attached to me. As I gathered books, clothes, and mementos, a knock came at my door. My heart raced until Patricia's voice called out, "Emma, it's Patricia Winters with a Mr. Robert Morris. He says he's your uncle." I opened the door cautiously to find Uncle Robert looking nervous and out of place, Patricia watching him with professional suspicion. "I'm sorry to drop in unannounced," he said, his eyes darting around as if expecting my father to materialize. "I needed to warn you. They're meeting tonight with a man named Victor Blackwell. He's a private investigator with a questionable reputation. They're planning to dig up anything they can use against you." The betrayal stung, even though it shouldn't have surprised me. "Thank you for telling me," I said, genuinely moved by his risk in coming here. "There's more," he continued, lowering his voice. "Your father found a key in your grandfather's desk years ago. He thinks it might be for a safety deposit box they never told him about. He's been obsessed with it for years. Now he's convinced that's where the real money is hidden." This information struck me as significant, though I wasn't sure why. "Do you know what the key looks like?" "Small, old-fashioned, with some kind of animal engraved on it. A rabbit, I think." My mind flashed to the rabbit-shaped keychain Mr. Harrison had given me from my grandparents. The key to their house had been on it, but there was another smaller key I hadn't identified. Could that be what my father was searching for? After Uncle Robert left with a final warning to be careful, I called Mr. Harrison immediately. The key with the rabbit, I said without preamble. What does it open? There was a pause before he answered. Not over the phone, Emma. Bring it with you tomorrow. It's time you learned about the other half of your inheritance, the part that isn't about money at all. I barely slept that night in the hotel room Patricia had arranged. My mind raced with questions about the mysterious key, the list of strangers for the summit, and what my grandparents might have planned. By morning, I felt both exhausted and energized by the possibilities ahead. Mr. Harrison was waiting in his office when I arrived, along with an elderly woman I didn't recognize. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant bob, and despite her advanced age, she carried herself with remarkable poise. Emma, this is Margaret's oldest friend, Eleanor Robinson, Mr. Harrison introduced us. She's here to help explain some things your grandparents kept private. Eleanor took my hands in hers, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You look so much like her, she said softly. She was so proud of you, dear. For the next hour, Eleanor and Mr. Harrison revealed a side of my grandparents I'd never known. Beyond their modest public persona and successful business ventures, Thomas and Margaret Winters had been quiet philanthropists for decades, operating through anonymous channels to help individuals in crisis. They never wanted recognition. Eleanor explained. They believed true charity happened in the shadows, not the spotlight. Mr. Harrison opened a large leather ledger. This contains records of everyone they helped over the years, college tuitions for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, medical bills for families facing catastrophic illness, small business loans for immigrants starting over, bail money for those wrongfully accused. I paged through the ledger in awe. Hundreds of names, dates, amounts, and brief descriptions filled the pages, representing lives touched by my grandparents' quiet generosity. The list of people for the summit, I realized. They're all from here, aren't they? Eleanor nodded. Everyone on that list was helped by your grandparents at some crucial moment. Many of them went on to help others in turn. Together, they form what Margaret called the Ripple, a community of people who understand that wealth's true purpose is to create positive change. And the key? I asked, placing the small rabbit-engraved key on the desk. Mr. Harrison smiled. That opens a safety deposit box, but not the one your father imagines filled with gold bars or bearer bonds. May I? I handed him the key, and he led us to the bank vault. Inside, he used the key to open a medium-sized box and gestured for me to look inside. Rather than valuables, the box contained dozens of handwritten letters, each in an envelope with a name that matched someone from the summit list. On top lay an envelope with my name written in my grandmother's elegant script. Dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then James has determined it's time for you to understand the true foundation of our legacy. The financial wealth we've left. You is merely a tool. Our real treasure is the community we've built, people whose lives we were privileged to touch when they needed it most. Each person coming to the summit has their own story of transformation. Together, they represent what money is truly for, not accumulation or status, but human connection and possibility. They are coming not just to support you against those who would control our legacy, but to show you how to carry it forward. The greatest joy of wealth is not in having it, but in sharing it wisely. This is the inheritance we most wanted to leave you, not the money itself, but the wisdom to use it for good. All our love, Grandma. I read the letter twice, emotion tightening my chest. While my family had been obsessing over bank accounts and property deeds, my grandparents had been creating something far more valuable, a living legacy of human connection and positive impact. There's one more thing you should see, Eleanor said gently. She handed me a small leather notebook I recognized as my grandfather's daily journal. Turn to the last entry, she instructed. My grandfather's bold handwriting filled the page, dated just 3 days before the accident. Margaret and I finalized everything with James today. If our fears about William and the others prove justified, Emma will have the support she needs. I worry we're placing too heavy a burden on her shoulders, but Margaret reminds me that we've watched Emma's character develop since childhood. She has the heart for this work. Today I watched her helping that young boy find the right book at the library, patiently asking questions, really listening to what he needed, not just what he said he wanted. That's the essence of what we've tried to do with our resources, listen deeply to understand the real need. Emma does this naturally. She doesn't realize yet that in choosing a career serving others rather than chasing wealth, she's already proven herself the perfect steward for what we'll leave behind. The money is just a magnifying glass for who you already are. Emma's goodness will only be magnified by these resources. I am at peace with our decision. By the time I finished reading, tears streamed down my face. My grandfather's words affirmed something I desperately needed to hear, that my life choices, so often dismissed by my parents as impractical or naive, had been seen and valued by the two people who mattered most to me. The summit happens in 5 days, Mr. Harrison said gently. Until then, we have work to do to prepare you to meet these people and understand what your grandparents envisioned. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. I moved into a secure apartment arranged by Patricia, continued my financial education with Mr. Harrison, and worked with Martin Chen to counter my father's legal maneuvers. Dr. Okafor helped me process the emotional upheaval and establish healthy boundaries. Through it all, I felt my grandparents' presence guiding me, not just through the practical arrangements they'd made, but through the values they'd instilled in me since childhood. Their foresight in preparing me for this moment, even when I didn't know I was being prepared, filled me with gratitude and determination. My family continued their campaign of pressure and intimidation. My father escalated his legal challenges, filing additional motions questioning the validity of the will itself. My mother attempted to contact my colleagues at the library, spreading rumors about my mental health. Daniel tried to hack into my email accounts. Each attack strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about honoring my grandparents' vision and protecting the community they had built. The day before the summit, Mr. Harrison called with alarming news. Your father has somehow discovered that something important is happening at the bank tomorrow. He's planning to show up with the entire family and their attorney. Let them come, I said, surprising myself with my calmness. It's time they understood what this inheritance is really about. That night, as I prepared for what would surely be a confrontation, I found myself returning to my grandmother's letters. One passage in particular stood out. Remember, Emma, that compassion doesn't mean allowing yourself to be manipulated. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to hold firm boundaries that prevent them from harming themselves or others. Your father and the others are trapped in a mindset that sees money as identity. In fighting for control of our estate, they're really fighting for control of their own worth. See this clearly, and you'll respond with wisdom rather than anger. With those words echoing in my mind, I finally fell asleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The morning of the summit dawned clear and bright. I dressed carefully in a simple blue dress my grandmother had helped me choose for my college graduation. When I arrived at the bank, Mr. Harrison was waiting in the lobby. They're all here, he said quietly. Your family arrived 20 minutes ago, demanding to be included in any meetings about the estate. And the others, your grandparents' community, they've all come too. Everyone on the list. He led me to the bank's largest conference room, where an extraordinary scene was unfolding. On one side of the long table sat my family, my father looking belligerent, my mother tense, Daniel slouched in feigned indifference, Aunt Claire nervously checking her makeup, and Uncle Robert standing slightly apart from the others. On the other side was the most diverse group of people I'd ever seen gathered in one place: elderly couples, middle-aged professionals, young parents with children, students, people of every ethnicity and background imaginable. They sat together, talking quietly among themselves, united by something I couldn't yet see but could somehow feel. The room fell silent as I entered. All eyes turned to me, some hostile, some curious, some warm with recognition though we'd never met. What is this circus? My father demanded. We're here for a family financial meeting, not whatever social experiment this is supposed to be. Before I could respond, an elderly man with work-roughened hands stood up from the community side of the table. My name is Joseph Martinez, he said, his voice steady despite his age. 40 years ago, I was about to lose my family's hardware store during the recession. Thomas Winters walked in one day, bought a single hammer, and left a check for $50,000 on the counter as he walked out. When I tried to thank him, he only said, "The hammer was overpriced, so I'm evening things out." A middle-aged woman in medical scrubs stood next. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. 25 years ago, I was a struggling pre-med student about to drop out because I couldn't afford tuition. An anonymous scholarship appeared the day before I had to withdraw. Years later, Margaret Winters came to my clinic with a minor complaint and revealed she'd been my benefactor. When I tried to thank her, she only asked that I find my own student to help someday. I've put 17 students through medical school since then. One by one, people rose to tell their stories: the young couple who had received down payment assistance for their first home, the former addict who got rehabilitation instead of jail through my grandparents' intervention, the refugee family whose restaurant was saved by an anonymous business loan, the artist whose studio space had been subsidized for a decade. Each story revealed another facet of my grandparents' quiet philanthropy. Each person described not just receiving financial help, but being treated with dignity, being seen as full of potential rather than merely needy. And each concluded by explaining how they had paid that spirit forward in their own lives. My family sat in stunned silence as the testimonials continued. The narrative they had constructed, of miserly grandparents hoarding wealth and a manipulative granddaughter, crumbled in the face of this living evidence of generosity and vision. When the last person had spoken, Mr. Harrison stood. Thomas and Margaret Winters created their wealth through intelligence and hard work, but they understood it came with responsibility. They built this community over decades, identifying people with potential who needed just one obstacle removed to thrive. This is their true legacy, not the money itself, but what it made possible. He turned to me. Emma, your grandparents chose you as their heir because they saw in you the same qualities that guided their own lives: compassion, discernment, and a fundamental understanding that wealth is merely a tool for creating positive change. They trusted you to continue this work, to maintain and grow this community of mutual support and opportunity. My father, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally found his voice. This is all very touching, he said, his tone dismissive. But it doesn't change the fact that Emma is unqualified to manage this estate. These people's stories are nice, but sentiment doesn't build or preserve wealth. Joseph Martinez, the hardware store owner, looked directly at my father. With respect, Mr. Winters, you're missing the point. Your parents didn't see wealth as something to be preserved like a museum piece. They saw it as fuel for human potential. From what they told us about Emma, she understands this perfectly. They told you about Emma? My mother asked, startled. They barely spoke about family matters with us. They spoke about Emma all the time, Sarachan said simply. They were so proud of her choice to become a librarian, to dedicate herself to connecting people with knowledge and stories that might change their lives. They saw it as exactly the kind of work they valued, helping people access tools for transformation. As the conversation continued, I watched a remarkable shift happen in the room. My family, who had arrived ready for battle, found themselves confronted not with legal arguments or financial statements, but with the living impact of my grandparents' values. The abstract concept of an $18 million inheritance was being transformed before our eyes into stories of changed lives and ripple effects spanning decades. Uncle Robert, who had remained quiet until now, suddenly moved from my family's side of the table to stand beside me. I've been complicit in this, he said, addressing both sides. I've known for years that Thomas and Margaret were helping people quietly, but I never spoke up when William and the others disparaged them for being cheap or unambitious. I was a coward, and I'm sorry. He turned to me. Emma, your grandparents chose exactly the right person. I'll testify to that in any court if needed. The atmosphere in the room had transformed. My family's position, so aggressive and entitled at the start, now seemed small and hollow against the backdrop of these powerful stories of generosity and transformation. Mr. Harrison nodded to me, signaling it was time for me to speak. I took a deep breath and faced my family directly. Dad, Mom, Daniel, Aunt Claire, I understand now why Grandma and Grandpa kept their true work hidden from you. You've always seen money as a measure of status and control. They saw it differently. And so do I gestured to the community gathered around us. This is my inheritance, not just assets to manage, but a vision to carry forward, a community to nurture, a tradition of quiet generosity to continue. If you want to fight me legally for control of the money, you can try. But you can never take this legacy from me, because it lives in values and relationships, not bank accounts. My father's face flushed with anger, but for once, he seemed at a loss for words. My mother looked confused, as if trying to reconcile these revelations with her long-held narrative about my grandparents. Daniel stared at the floor, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Only Aunt Claire showed a glimmer of something different, perhaps recognition or regret as she surveyed the room full of lives touched by her parents' generosity. The choice is yours, I continued. You can continue fighting me for control of something you never really understood, or you can try to understand what Grandma and Grandpa were actually building. I would welcome your participation in this community, if you're willing to embrace its values. But I will not allow you to dismantle it for your own benefit. The silence that followed felt like a turning point, not just for my inheritance, but for my family itself. In this moment of truth, standing surrounded by my grandparents' living legacy, I felt their presence more strongly than ever. Whatever happened next, I knew I was ready to carry their vision forward. The silence that followed my words stretched like an elastic band ready to snap. Everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see which way the tension would break. My father's face had gone from red to an alarming shade of purple, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the conference table. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, the conference room door opened, and an elderly man with a weathered face and stooped shoulders entered. He moved slowly with the help of a carved wooden cane, but his eyes were sharp and clear beneath bushy white eyebrows. Sorry I'm late, he announced to the room. Bus was running behind schedule. Mr. Harrison immediately stood Judge Franklin, thank you for coming. Please, take my seat. A murmur ran through the room as my father's expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear. Judge Walter Franklin had been the most respected judge in our county for over 40 years before his retirement. His reputation for fairness and wisdom was legendary, as was his immunity to any form of influence or pressure. Judge Franklin, my father said, attempting to regain his composure. I wasn't aware you were involved in this matter. Oh, I've been involved for decades, William, the judge replied, settling into the chair Mr. Harrison had vacated. Your parents asked me to serve as the ethical overseer of their philanthropic work shortly after I retired from the bench. I've watched the whole program unfold over 25 years. He turned to me with a kind smile. You must be Emma. Thomas. And Margaret spoke of you often. Said you had the heart for this work. I'm trying to understand what this work actually entails, I admitted. Judge Franklin nodded. That's why we're all here today. Your grandparents created something quite remarkable, what some might call a living endowment. Not just a foundation that writes checks, but a community of people committed to paying forward the help they received. He looked around the room, acknowledging each person from the community side of the table with a nod or smile. Every person here received help from your grandparents when they needed it most. Not just money, but mentorship, connections, and dignity. And each of them has, in turn, helped others. The judge pulled a worn leather notebook from his pocket. Thomas kept meticulous records. In the past 25 years, their initial investments in these individuals have generated an estimated $43 million in community value, businesses started, jobs created, education completed, medical care provided, homes secured, arts supported. He turned to my father. That's a return on investment that would impress even the most hardened financial analyst, wouldn't you say, William? My father shifted uncomfortably. It's all very admirable, but you still believe Emma is unqualified to manage the estate, Judge Franklin finished for him. Let me ask you something. What do you think the purpose of your parents' wealth was? To provide security for the family, my father answered without hesitation. To create a legacy that benefits their descendants. I see, the judge said. Thoughtfully. And what would you do with the assets if you controlled them? My father straightened, sensing an opportunity. I would consolidate the investments, focus on maximum growth, create a proper family office to manage the portfolio professionally. The annual returns alone could support the entire family in the lifestyle we deserve. Judge Franklin listened. Impassively. And the philanthropic work? The community your parents built? We would make appropriate charitable donations, of course, my father replied, glancing at the community members. Tax-advantaged giving to recognized organizations. So you would dismantle this network of direct support in favor of conventional charitable giving, the judge clarified. It would be more efficient, my father insisted. Judge Franklin turned to me. And you, Emma? What would you do if you maintained control of your inheritance? All eyes in the room turned to me. This was the moment of truth, the question I'd been pondering since learning of my inheritance. I took a deep breath. I would continue what my grandparents started, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. Not just preserving their approach, but expanding it. As a librarian, I connect people with knowledge every day. I see which resources transform lives and which ones just gather dust. I understand the difference between giving people what they think they want and helping them discover what they truly need. I looked around at the faces of the community my grandparents had built. These relationships aren't inefficient, they're the whole point. My grandparents didn't just write checks, they invested in human potential. They recognized that sometimes the greatest barriers to a person's success aren't lack of talent or work ethic, but practical obstacles that a little well-timed help can remove. Judge Franklin nodded thoughtfully. And how would you address your family's concerns about your financial inexperience? I would continue working with the advisors my grandparents trusted, I replied. I would educate myself about financial management, just as I've been doing this past week. But I would never forget that managing money well is a means to an end, not the end itself. I turned to face my father directly. Dad, you've always seen Grandpa and Grandma's frugality as a character flaw, as if they were denying themselves and you the trappings of wealth out of some misguided principle. But now I understand they weren't denying themselves anything. They were making conscious choices about what actually mattered. Something flickered in my father's eyes, not quite understanding, but perhaps the first crack in his certainty. Judge Franklin closed his notebook and addressed the room. Thomas and Margaret Winters spent years considering who should carry forward their vision. They chose Emma not on a whim, but after careful observation of her character, values, and natural inclinations. Having heard from all sides today, I can only say their judgment appears sound. He turned to my father and the rest of my family. The legal challenges you've initiated are, of course, you're right. But as someone who has spent over 40 years in the law, I can tell you they are unlikely to succeed given the precautions Thomas and Margaret took in establishing their will and trust. The judge's words seemed to land heavily on my family. My father's posture slumped slightly, the fight visibly draining from him as the reality of the situation sank in. Sarah Chen, the doctor who had spoken earlier, stood up. "If I may," she said, looking directly at my parents. "Your parents helped me become a doctor when I had no resources and no connections. I've since helped other students do the same. 3 of them are practicing physicians now, serving communities that desperately needed medical care." She gestured toward a young woman sitting nearby. "This is Amara Johnson, one of those students I helped. She's now a pediatrician working in an underserved neighborhood. Every child she treats is part of your parents' legacy too." Joseph Martinez, the hardware store owner, joined in. "My store has employed over 50 people in the community since Thomas saved it from closing. We've trained dozens of young people in practical skills, given them their first jobs, helped some start their own businesses." One by one, others around the table shared similar stories, the ripple effects of my grandparents' generosity spreading outward through generations and across communities. My mother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke. "I never knew any of this," she said softly. "They never talked about helping all these people. That was part of their philosophy," Judge Franklin explained. "They believed that public charity too often becomes about the giver's ego rather than the recipient's needs. They preferred to help quietly, preserving the dignity of those they assisted." I watched as something shifted in my mother's expression, a dawning recognition that perhaps she had misjudged her in-laws all these years. Daniel, never one to read the room, broke in. "This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that we're family. We deserve a share of the inheritance regardless of how it's used." Joseph Martinez looked at him thoughtfully. "Young man, I knew your grandfather for 40 years. He often said that inheritance isn't an entitlement, it's a responsibility. He believed strongly that giving children wealth without values was doing them harm, not good." Uncle Robert, who had been standing by my side, placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Your grandparents offered you something more valuable than money, Daniel. They offered you an example of how to live with purpose and integrity. We all chose not to see it." My Aunt Claire dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Whether her tears were genuine or another performance was impossible to tell, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "Mother tried to involve me in her volunteer work when I was younger. I always had an excuse: too busy, too tired, not my thing. I never understood why it mattered so much to her." "It's not too late to understand now," I said gently. A woman in her 60s who had been introduced earlier as my grandmother's college roommate smiled at Claire. "Margaret always hoped you would come around, dear. She kept every card you ever sent, you know. Even the store-bought ones with just your signature." Something genuine broke through Claire's carefully maintained facade. "She did?" The meeting continued for another hour, evolving from confrontation to conversation. My family didn't suddenly transform or abandon their desire for a portion of the inheritance, but the aggressive certainty that had fueled their campaign began to crumble as they confronted the reality of my grandparents' true legacy. As people began to disperse, Judge Franklin asked my family and me to remain behind. When the room had cleared except for us, Mr. Harrison, and the judge, he removed an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Thomas and Margaret left this with me years ago, to be opened only in this specific circumstance, if the family challenged their will," and Emma stood firm in her commitment to continue their work. He broke the seal and removed a single sheet of paper, adjusting his reading glasses. "To our son William, our daughter Claire, and our grandchildren," he read. "If you are hearing these words, then you have chosen to fight over money rather than honor our wishes. We are deeply disappointed, but not surprised. We have watched for decades as materialistic values have guided your choices and strained our relationship." My father started to interject, but Judge Franklin held up a hand to silence him. "However," he continued reading, "we have never stopped hoping that you might one day understand what truly matters in life. To that end, we have instructed our trustee to establish separate charitable foundations in each of your names, funded with $500,000 each." A collective gasp went around the table. "These foundations will be dedicated to causes aligned with our values: education, community development, medical access, and the arts. You will serve as the directors of your respective foundations, with Emma as the oversight trustee. You will be required to actively participate in the grant-making process, meeting the people you help, understanding their circumstances, and following their progress." Judge Franklin looked up from the letter. "They go on to say that after 5 years of active, good faith participation in this work, each of you will be eligible to receive a personal inheritance of $1 million, with the stipulation that at least half be dedicated to continued philanthropic work. The shock on my family's faces mirrored what I felt inside. Even now, my grandparents were offering not just resources, but an opportunity for transformation, a chance for my family to experience the deeper satisfaction that comes from meaningful giving rather than endless acquisition. The choice is yours, Judge Franklin concluded, folding the letter. You can continue your legal challenges, which are unlikely to succeed and will drain resources from the estate. Or you can accept this opportunity to participate in your parents' legacy in a way that might actually change your perspective on wealth and purpose. My father was the first to recover from the shock. They're bribing us from beyond the grave, he said, but the usual edge was missing from his voice. I prefer to see it as them offering you an education, Judge Franklin replied. One that might be more valuable than the money itself. The decision wasn't made that day. My family left to consider their options, subdued and thoughtful in a way I'd never seen them before. Whether they would accept my grandparents' final offer remained to be seen, but something had shifted in our dynamic. For perhaps the first time, they were seeing me not as the compliant, overlooked daughter and niece, but as someone chosen for qualities they had failed to recognize or value. In the weeks that followed, remarkable changes unfolded. My father, after consulting with his attorneys about the slim chances of successfully contesting the will, was the first to accept the foundation arrangement. To everyone's surprise, he approached the responsibility with unexpected seriousness, reading extensively about effective philanthropy and meeting with community leaders to understand local needs. My mother, initially reluctant, found herself drawn to supporting arts education in underserved schools, perhaps remembering her own childhood dreams of becoming a painter before she turned to more practical pursuits. Daniel's foundation focused on technology access for low-income students, leveraging his tech knowledge in a positive direction for the first time. Aunt Claire and Uncle Robert chose to work together on their foundation, supporting family stability. Programs that helped parents stay employed while raising children. Even my cousin Stephen eventually joined the effort, moving back from Denver to help. As for me, I continued my work at the library while gradually taking on the broader responsibilities of my inheritance. With Mr. Harrison's guidance, I established the Thomas and Margaret Winters Legacy Foundation as an umbrella organization that supported both direct giving to individuals and the family's new charitable initiatives. I also took up residence in my grandparents' home, turning it into a community gathering space for workshops, meetings, and events that furthered their vision. The garden my grandfather had lovingly tended became a teaching space for urban agriculture. My grandmother's kitchen hosted cooking classes for families learning to prepare healthy meals on tight budgets. 6 months after the summit, we gathered again, my family, the community my grandparents had built, and the new recipients of help from our various foundations. The atmosphere was dramatically different from our first meeting. Tensions hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had evolved into something more productive, the creative friction of different perspectives united in a common purpose. I watched as my father engaged in animated conversation with Joseph Martinez about the hardware store's apprenticeship program. Nearby, my mother helped a young artist arrange her paintings for display. Daniel demonstrated a coding program to a group of fascinated teenagers. Aunt Claire and Uncle Robert circulated with trays of food, making everyone feel welcome. Mr. Harrison joined me as I observed the scene. Your grandparents would be proud, he said quietly. Not just of you, though certainly that, but of what's happening with your family. This is exactly what they hoped might be possible. It's still early days, I cautioned. Old habits die hard. True, he acknowledged. But they're experiencing firsthand what Thomas and Margaret understood so well, that the joy of giving with purpose is far more satisfying than the fleeting pleasure of acquisition and status. And the money itself is safer this way, I added with a small smile. Distributed across multiple foundations with oversight and accountability. Mr. Harrison chuckled. Indeed. Your grandparents were not just generous, they were strategic. By structuring things this way, they ensured their wealth would serve their values for generations, regardless of any individual's weaknesses or whims. As the gathering continued, I found myself standing before the portrait of my grandparents that hung in the living room. Painted on their 50th anniversary, it captured them exactly as I remembered, my grandfather's eyes twinkling with gentle humor, my grandmother's posture elegant but approachable, both of them radiating the quiet contentment of lives well lived. I'm trying, I whispered to them. I hope I'm getting it right. A hand touched my shoulder, and I turned to find Judge Franklin beside me. You know, he said, your grandfather once told me something I've never forgotten. We were discussing a particularly complex case, and I was worried about making the wrong decision. He said, Walter, right decisions aren't about perfect outcomes. They're about aligning your choices with your deepest values and accepting that you can't control all the consequences. The judge squeezed my shoulder gently. You're honoring their values beautifully, Emma. The outcomes will unfold as they will. Later that evening, as the gathering wound down, I found myself alone with my father in my grandfather's study. He stood examining the bookshelves, running his fingers along the spines of volumes on economics, philosophy, and history. I never really knew them, he said suddenly, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. My own parents, and I never understood what drove them. I remained silent, sensing he had more to say. I always thought they were judging me, finding me wanting. He continued. Maybe they were, in some ways. But I see now they were offering me something I was too blind to value. He turned to face me. I'm not promising to become some selfless philanthropist overnight, Emma. That's not who I am. But I am beginning to understand why they chose you, not me or Claire or Daniel. You saw what mattered to them because it matters to you too. It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was perhaps the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. It was a beginning, not of complete transformation, but of the possibility of a new kind of relationship based on something more authentic than our old patterns. 1 year after inheriting my grandparents' estate, I still marvel at how differently things turned out from what any of us expected. The money itself, substantial as it is, has proven to be the least important part of my inheritance. The true legacy is the network of relationships, the living example of purposeful giving, and the ongoing opportunity to help remove obstacles for people with potential. My family has not been magically transformed into perfect individuals. My father still obsesses over investment returns. My mother still cares too much about appearances. Daniel still dreams of striking it rich with minimal effort. Aunt Claire still has her dramatic moments. But all of them are now engaged, however imperfectly, in work that connects them to something larger than themselves. As for me, I continue to divide my time between the library, where I find daily joy in connecting people with knowledge, and the foundation work, where I'm learning to steward resources in ways that honor my grandparents' vision. I'm not managing everything perfectly, but I'm guided by their wisdom, that money is just a tool, that true wealth lies in human connection, and that the greatest satisfaction comes from helping others realize their potential. Recently, I met with a young woman named Zoe, a brilliant programmer who needed funding to complete her degree after her parents lost their home in a fire. As we talked about her dreams of creating accessible technology for people with disabilities, I saw in her the same spark my grandparents must have recognized in so many others over the years, the potential for one person's success to create ripples of positive change. When I told her the foundation would cover her remaining education costs, her initial disbelief gave way to tears of relief and gratitude. I don't know how I'll ever repay this, she said. You don't repay it to me, I explained, sharing the philosophy my grandparents had lived by. Someday, when you're established in your career, you'll find someone else who needs the kind of help you're receiving now. That's how this works, not a debt to be repaid, but a legacy to be continued. The bank manager, Mr. Harrison, once told me that my grandparents had been quietly revolutionary in their approach to wealth. They rejected the conventional wisdom that money should be hoarded, controlled, and passed down in ways that often created entitlement rather than responsibility. Instead, they envisioned wealth as a current that should flow through a community, removing obstacles and creating opportunities wherever it touched. Standing in my grandparents' garden on a recent Sunday afternoon, watching a diverse group of people, family members, foundation recipients, community partners, share food and conversation, I felt the profound rightness of their vision. This was what they had been building all along, not a fortune to be guarded, but a community to be nurtured. When my grandparents died and left me their estate, I inherited far more than money. I inherited a purpose, a philosophy, and a community. I inherited the wisdom to see wealth not as a measure of worth but as a tool for creating possibility. Most importantly, I inherited the courage to stand firm when it would have been easier to give in to pressure and manipulation. The bank manager may have turned to me that day in the conference room, but it was my grandparents who had been preparing me all along for the responsibility they knew would someday be mine. Their greatest gift wasn't the money, it was the vision. To use it well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.